All right, my friends, gather around this virtual campfire. I am your companion in the darkness, the storyteller who waits for nightfall to share with you what hides in the shadowy corners. Tonight, as we find ourselves in the heart of spring, that season that brings optimism and rejuvenation, I will tell you 3 very different tales. Stories that happen to people just like you and me, in places that are supposed to be safe. But spring, my friends, does not bring only flowers and gentle breezes. Sometimes spring awakens other things, things that should have remained dormant in their deep slumber. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and let us begin. Story 1, Whispers Under the Apple Tree. The first story is told to me by Ella, a young woman who had just moved to the English countryside. Ella was searching for peace after the noise of London, and she found it in a small stone cottage on the edge of a remote village. The cottage was surrounded by a neglected garden, but what stole her heart was the giant apple tree in its center. It was late April, and the tree was in the full glory of its bloom, like a bride wearing a crown of white blossoms moist with dew. At first, the tree was a source of joy for Ella. Every morning, she would place a chair under its blossom-laden branches, drink her coffee, and listen to the chirping of birds building their nests among the boughs. The scene was breathtaking, like a postcard of spring. But one thing was strange: the smell of the tree. It wasn't just the delicate scent of apple blossoms. There was something else. An earthy, overly sweet smell, reminding her of something decaying, barely masked by perfume. Ella ignored it, attributing it to the dampness of the earth awakening after a long winter. One evening, as Ella was closing the cottage windows, she heard a strange sound coming from the garden. It was a whispering sound, unlike the rustle of leaves or the wind. It was more like an old woman speaking slowly. She froze in place, straining her ears. The sound was undoubtedly coming from under the apple tree. It was very faint, fragmented, as if someone was speaking from underground. Her body shivered as she remembered that the tree's roots were massive and sprawling, twisting around each other in a way that now seemed like gigantic, interlocked fingers. In the following nights, the sound was no longer just a whisper. She began to hear clear words. Ella, come. Spring is here. The voice was calling her by name. Ella was terrified. How did these voices know her name? She isolated herself in the cottage, closed curtains, and turned up the television volume. But the call penetrated everything, as if it didn't come through her ears, but originated directly inside her head. One night, she woke up to a soft tapping on the glass of her bedroom window, overlooking the tree. Ella, come play. The earth is warm. She couldn't sleep after that. She would stay up all night, staring at the tree from behind the curtain. On the 4th night, she saw something that froze the blood in her veins. Under the silver moonlight, it wasn't just the white blossoms swaying with the breeze. There were shapes, small, translucent human shapes, like the specters of children clinging to the branches and swinging. Their faces were pale, but their eyes were empty and dark. They were not alone. From the base of the gnarled tree trunk, a long, pale, unnaturally thin hand, like a dry branch, was pointing at her. The next day, Ella decided to research the history of the cottage. She went to the village and met an old man who was the local historian. When she asked him about the cottage, his face darkened. He said in a trembling voice, "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to frighten you. But that tree, it's no ordinary apple tree." He told her that in the 1950s, a woman named Agatha lived in the cottage, suffering from loneliness. Agatha loved children with a mad passion, but she couldn't have any of her own. Every spring, she would lure children into her garden with sweets and games, and then they would disappear. Nothing was ever proven against her, but the whole village knew. One spring, the villagers' anger boiled over, and they stormed her house. They found no trace of the children, but they found Agatha crouched under the apple tree, digging with her bare hands and humming to them. She was sent to a mental asylum, but the tree remained. Ella returned to the cottage horrified. She looked at the tree and saw it with new eyes. The complex roots resembled a tangle of small human limbs, and the thick trunk seemed to have bumps resembling tormented faces. She realized Agatha hadn't buried the children under it, but rather fed them to the tree. The tree grew on their bodies and memories, and every spring it blossomed with their specters, calling out in the voice of the deranged mother who had cared for them eternally. That night, the calling was stronger than ever. It wasn't just a voice in her head. The ground under the cottage shook. She looked out the window to see the tree's bark splitting, and from the crack oozed a dark, viscous liquid like sap. Then, from the crack, a shape began to emerge. It was the form of an old woman, her body fused with wood, her eyes like dying embers, and her mouth open in a toothless smile. This was the spectre of Agatha, the spirit of the tree. She stretched her wooden arms towards the cottage and whispered in a voice full of hungry longing, "I have returned, and my spring is not yet complete." Ella ran out of the cottage through the back door, leaving everything behind. As she ran through the dark fields, she looked back at the apple tree. In the moonlight, the white blossoms looked like small skulls smiling at her, and the branches swayed like arms waving her goodbye or a near meeting. Ella never returned to that cottage, but she told me that every spring, wherever she is, when she smells the scent of apple blossoms, she hears a faint whisper calling her name and remembers that some beautiful things grow on horrifying things, and that spring does not just awaken flowers, but also awakens hunger. Story 2, The Guest in the Camping Tent. The second story happened to a young man named Liam in the vast forests of the northwestern United States, specifically in Oregon. Liam was a nature and solo adventure enthusiast. In late March, he decided to go on a week-long camping trip in a remote nature reserve, where the snow was melting and the streams were teeming with life. He wanted to enjoy the forest's awakening after its slumber, far from the noise of the world. Liam reached the perfect campsite near a small lake that still held thin sheets of ice on its edges. The air was crisp and humid, carrying the scent of pine needles and mud. He pitched his tent beside a giant pine tree, lit a small fire, and sat listening to the symphony of spring. The trickling water, the rustle of dry leaves under the feet of small animals, and the sounds of birds returning from their migration. Everything was perfect until darkness fell. On the first night, while Liam was asleep in his sleeping bag, he woke up to the sound of footsteps outside the tent. They weren't the footsteps of a four-legged animal. They were heavy footsteps of something walking on two legs. Slow, deliberate steps, crunching twigs under their weight. Liam froze, holding his breath. He heard the sound circle the tent twice, then stop right at the entrance. Liam remained motionless, staring at the tent zipper, expecting it to open at any moment. But it didn't. After minutes that felt like hours, he heard the footsteps slowly recede towards the forest. In the morning, he went out optimistically, expecting to find nothing. But he found large, muddy footprints around the tent. bare footprints. The footprints of a human walking barefoot in a cold, muddy forest in March. It was strange, but he convinced himself it was just another eccentric hiker. The second night was worse. In the middle of the night, Liam awoke not to footsteps, but to laughter. The laughter of a small child coming from just a few meters away from the tent, from the direction of the lake. It was an innocent, cheerful laugh. But in this time and place, it was terrifying. He grabbed his flashlight and slowly opened the tent. He aimed the beam toward the lake. He saw nothing. No children, no animals. Only fog beginning to rise over the water's surface. And suddenly, he saw something in the center of the flashlight beam. It was a hand. A small child's hand, waving at him from behind a distant tree trunk, then disappearing. He quickly closed the tent, trembling. This time he felt real fear. No one lived within miles of here, so where did a child come from? On the third day, Liam decided to search the surrounding area. On the other side of the lake, he found the remains of what looked like a very old campsite. A rotting wooden picnic table, and a stone structure resembling a fireplace covered in moss. The place seemed abandoned for decades. As he wandered, he noticed something carved into the bark of a large tree. It was a date, spring 1984, and under it, one word deeply engraved, sorry. A shiver ran down Liam's spine. He rushed back to his camp. That night, he did not sleep. He sat in his tent, flashlight in one hand, pocket knife in the other. Around 2 a.m., he heard whispers. Not the whispers of one person, but several voices. Children's voices, talking quickly and softly, as if arguing. The sound came from all around the tent. Whispers. Come on. Ask him. No, you. He's scared. Then a clearer voice from the rest. Hey, mister, can we come in? Liam jolted, his heart pounding violently. The voice was clear, as if the source was a child standing right behind the tarpaulin. Who's there? He shouted, his voice trembling. The whispers stopped abruptly. A heavy silence fell. Then the tent zipper started to move. It was opening slowly, tooth by tooth, by itself. Liam screamed and lunged forward, pulling the zipper with his hand to stop it from opening. The zipper resisted for seconds, as if something was pulling it hard from outside, then suddenly stopped. Silence fell again. Liam sat panting, staring at the closed entrance. Then he heard another sound, the sound of a child crying, muffled, gradually turning into the moaning of an adult. A moan full of regret and pain. Liam couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed his bag, opened the tent from the back, and burst out like a madman. He ran in the darkness, stumbling over roots and rocks, not looking back. But as he ran, he glanced back at the camp. In the pale moonlight, he saw 3 small figures standing in front of his open tent. They were wearing torn, dirty clothes, their faces pale and their eyes sunken. But what made him scream and run faster was the 4th shape. The shape of an adult man, tall and thin, holding a rusty axe, standing behind them and smiling. His spectre was distorted, as if trying to hold a physical form, but failing. Liam realized in that moment the truth of what had happened. In the spring of 1984, this wasn't just a fun camping trip for a family. The father, driven by jealousy or madness, committed a heinous crime here, ending the lives of his children and then himself. And since then, every spring, when the snow melts and life returns to the forest, they return too. The children are looking for a playmate, and the father is looking for forgiveness, or perhaps for a new victim to repeat his eternal cycle. Liam reached his car in a state of collapse. He sped away down the dirt road, not stopping until he reached the first town. He didn't tell many people much, but he told me that one mark remained with him. A small scratch on the zipper of his tent from the inside. Not from the outside, but from the inside. As if something had already entered, sat close to him in the darkness, and left him this mark to remember. That spring is the season of remembrance, and some memories never die. Story 3. The mirror that does not reflect flowers. Our third and final story takes place in a slightly different world, but it is no less terrifying. It happened to a girl named Chloe in her modern apartment in the heart of Tokyo. Chloe was a freelance graphic designer, living a simple, organized life in a stylish apartment on the 12th floor. Spring had just begun, and the only cherry tree in the building's backyard had started to bloom. Chloe loved sitting on her balcony, watching the pink petals dance on the wind. And this year was her first spring in this apartment, so she was thrilled with the gorgeous view. At the end of the first week of spring, Chloe visited a flea market. She loved strange antiques, and there a mirror caught her eye. It was a tall mirror with a dark wooden frame intricately carved with cherry blossom motifs. The carvings looked strikingly lifelike. Captivated by its beauty, she bought it immediately and placed it in her bedroom opposite the window, where it reflected the daylight and made the room seem larger. On the very first night, something strange happened. Chloe woke up around 3 a.m. with a strange feeling, a feeling of cold. The air in the room was heavy and damp, not like the refreshing humidity of spring, but like the mustiness of an old cellar. Her attention was drawn to the mirror. In the darkness, its surface seemed to gleam with a faint internal light. She got out of bed and approached it. She looked at her reflection. It was normal. But behind her reflection, the shape of the window in the background seemed different. The window in reality was rectangular and modern, but in the mirror, it looked more like an old-fashioned arched window. Chloe rubbed her eyes and dismissed it as fatigue and the nocturnal lighting. The next day, she returned from work to find that some of the buds on the cherry tree outside her window had opened. The view was beautiful, but when she looked in the mirror, she froze. In reality, the blossoms were pale pink, but in the mirror, the tree's reflection bore dark red blossoms like blood. Chloe approached to examine the mirror. She touched the frame. The wooden carvings of the cherry blossoms were raised, but for a moment she felt one of the flowers move under her finger, as if it were pulsing. She jumped back. "This is insane," she muttered. She decided to cover the mirror with a cloth and return it to the market as soon as possible. But that night, a sound woke her up. A scratching sound. It was coming from under the cloth covering the mirror. Chloe crept slowly and quickly pulled the cloth away. She didn't see anything at first. Then she noticed that the reflection of her room was no longer accurate. The mirror no longer reflected Chloe's modern room. It was reflecting an old room with dark wooden walls and a tatami mat floor. And in the middle of that room, a woman in a white kimono sat, her long black hair cascading over her face. The woman was looking down into her lap, where she held something. It was a small child. The atmosphere in that reflected room was suffocating, pulsing with sorrow and madness. Chloe screamed and threw the cloth back over the mirror. She heard the sound of a child crying, coming from inside the mirror, muffled and distant. She did not sleep that night. She sat in the corner of the room, shivering until dawn broke. In the morning, Chloe called her friend, Yuki, who was interested in Japanese folklore. She sent her a picture of the mirror. Yuki called her back immediately, her voice trembling. "Chloe, where did you get this? These carvings? They're not just ordinary carvings. It's a seal. This is an uzume mirror, a burial mirror." Yuki explained that in the past, mirrors like this were placed in the room where a family confined someone suffering from severe mental illness, believing the sick spirit would be trapped in the mirror instead of harming others. If this mirror had truly been used, it contained something dark linked to a painful memory of a particular spring. Chloe remembered the reflection of the red blossoms. She researched the history of the building she lived in. She was shocked to discover that before the modern residential complex was built, a large old house stood on this exact site. And in the spring of 1953, a tragedy occurred. A woman named Hanako, suffering from severe depression after losing a child, was confined by her family to a room overlooking a cherry tree. One day, when the tree was in full bloom, Hanako's mind completely shattered. She grabbed her other child, the infant, and then took her own life. The maid found her drenched in cherry blossoms that had drifted in through the open window, stained crimson. Chloe realized that the mirror had been in that room, and that the reflection of the cherry tree was not red because of a flaw in the glass, but was stained with the memory of what happened beneath it. And that the woman she saw in the mirror was not just a ghost, but Hanako, trapped in the mirror world, reliving her moment of breakdown every spring. That night, Chloe packed her bag to leave, but when she looked at the mirror one last time, she saw that the reflection of the old room had become clearer. The woman, Hanako, was no longer looking at her lap. Her head was raised, looking directly at Chloe through the curtain of her hair, and she was smiling. Then, slowly, she began to crawl towards the surface of the mirror, from the inside out. Chloe ran out of the apartment, her heart almost bursting from her chest. She left everything and stayed with her friend Yuki. A week later, she mustered her courage and returned to the apartment with Yuki and a Shinto priest. The apartment was quiet. The mirror was still there, but when they looked at it, it no longer reflected anything but the real room. The blossoms on the tree outside the window had withered and fallen. The priest said calmly, "She has gone. Her season is over. But next spring, when the cherry tree blooms again, she will return with the blossoms, because spring is her season, and the mirror is her door." The priest took the mirror, but Chloe told me she still, to this day, fears seeing the cherry blossoms bloom, because she knows that somewhere behind a glass surface there is a woman waiting for spring, and waiting for someone to look into the mirror so she can see them with her. And so we reach the end of tonight's stories, my friends. 3 tales from spring, the season we all eagerly await. But remember, when you go for a walk under the blossoming trees, or listen to the sounds of the waking forest, or even when you look at your reflection in an old mirror, that spring does not only bring life. Sometimes it brings what was forgotten. Sometimes it awakens what is hungry. And sometimes it blooms with things you would never wish to see. I am your companion in the darkness. See you in the next tale. Good night.